They paved over my road without asking, so I made every one of their cars disappear. When I bought my cabin at the edge of Pine Hollow, the road leading to it was mine, written clearly on the deed. A half-mile stretch of gravel, carved by my grandfather's hands, connecting the cabin to the county highway. One summer morning, I woke to find fresh asphalt laid across it. New street signs glared. HOA private road. Residents only. They had taken my road. No permission. No notice. Just arrogance. By evening, I found a paper nailed to my front door. HOA Bylaw 14. Unauthorized use of HOA roadway prohibited. Violators will be towed. They were threatening me with trespass on my own road. My hands shook with rage, but my mind stayed cold. The morning sun barely crested the pines when I pulled up to the new gate at the entrance to Pine Hollow. It was a gaudy thing, wrought iron with gold-painted flourishes, like it belonged to a McMansion instead of our quiet, wooded neighborhood. I'd heard whispers about the HOA's latest power grab, but seeing the gate in person, gleaming under the dawn light, made my stomach twist. I rolled down my window, expecting maybe a keypad or a guard. Instead, I got Karen. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the Pine Hollow Homeowners Association, stepped out from a little booth beside the gate, her clipboard clutched like a royal scepter. Her blonde bob was immaculate, her smile a practiced blend of condescension and authority. She wore a navy blazer with the HOA logo, a pine tree circled by a laurel wreath, embroidered on the breast pocket. I'd seen her type before, the kind of person who thrived on control, who'd turn a neighborhood into her personal fiefdom if given half a chance. "Morning," I said, keeping my tone neutral. I just wanted to get to work. Karen's smile tightened. "You'll need an HOA pass to drive through here now," she said, her voice dripping with the satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting all morning to deliver that line. I blinked. "A pass? Since when?" "Since the last HOA meeting," she replied, tapping her clipboard. "Voted in by the majority. Didn't you get the newsletter?" I hadn't. I'd been too busy settling into the new house, unpacking boxes, and dealing with a leaking faucet to bother with the HOA's monthly propaganda. "Nobody told me about a pass," I said, trying to keep my irritation in check. "I live here. This is my road." "Not anymore," Karen said, her eyes glinting with something close to glee. "This is a private community now. All access is regulated by the HOA. No pass, no entry." I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out my deed, the ink still fresh from the closing 2 weeks ago. "This says I own the property at 23 Maple Drive. Last I checked, that includes the right to drive on the roads I pay taxes for." Karen barely glanced at the document before waving it away like it was a pesky fly. "Doesn't matter. Majority rules here. Welcome to Pine Hollow HOA." She handed me a glossy pamphlet with the same logo as her blazer, the words Community Standards printed in bold across the top. "You'll need to apply for a pass at the next meeting. Until then, you can park at the visitor lot and walk." "Walk?" I stared at her. My house was a good half-mile from the gate, through winding roads and dense trees. "You're kidding." "I don't kid about community standards," she said, her smile now a thin, sharp line. "Rules keep Pine Hollow safe and beautiful. You'll thank us when property values soar." I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles whitening. I wanted to argue, to tell her this was absurd, that no one had the right to gate off a public road and demand passes like we were living in some dystopian checkpoint. But the look in her eyes, cold, unwavering, almost daring me to push back, told me arguing would get me nowhere. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules, she was relishing the power. "Fine," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "When's the next meeting?" "Wednesday, 7 p.m., at the clubhouse," she said, stepping back to the booth. "Bring your application fee. Cash only." The gate hummed open, and I drove through, my jaw tight. In the rearview mirror, I saw Karen watching me, her clipboard raised like a shield. That was the moment I stopped arguing. That was the moment I started planning. I wasn't sure what my plan would be yet, but I knew one thing. Karen and her HOA weren't going to run my life. I'd moved to Pine Hollow for peace, for a quiet place to start over after the chaos of the city. I wasn't about to let a glorified hall monitor turn my fresh start into a bureaucratic nightmare. As I pulled into my driveway, the wheels in my head were already turning. If the HOA wanted to play games, I'd learn the rules, and then I'd beat them at their own. For weeks, I turned into a ghost in my own neighborhood, watching, waiting, and documenting. My notebook became my weapon, its pages filled with meticulous records, license plates, makes and models, parking habits, the exact times people left for work and returned home. I noted the HOA board members' cars in particular. Karen's sleek black SUV with its personalized plate reading Pine Mom, the treasurer's silver Lexus, the secretary's red Audi. They parked their shiny vehicles right where my grandfather's gravel driveway used to stretch, a wide swath of land that once marked the edge of our family's property. The same land the HOA had conveniently claimed for their community parking zone, without so much as a phone call to me. I wasn't just being paranoid. I'd gone back to the deed, spread it out on my kitchen table under the dim glow of a single bulb, and cross-referenced it with the county records I pulled from the clerk's office. The boundary lines were clear as day. The strip of land where the HOA had paved their precious parking lot was mine. My grandfather had bought it in the 60s, back when Pine Hollow was just a scattering of cabins and dirt roads. The HOA might have bullied the neighborhood into submission with their gates and passes, but legally, they were trespassing. Every single one of those cars, Karen's included, sat on my property. I started small, blending into the rhythm of the neighborhood. Mornings, I'd sit on my porch with a thermos of coffee, pretending to read the paper while jotting down details. Karen left at 7:15 a.m. sharp, always in a rush, her SUV's tires squealing as she headed to whatever power trip she had planned for the day. The treasurer, a balding man named Greg, was more predictable. Out by 8 o'clock, back by 6:30, his Lexus always parked in the same spot, second from the left. The secretary, a nervous woman named Linda, varied her schedule, but her red Audi was a constant in the lot, its wax job gleaming under the streetlights. I didn't just stop at the board. I cataloged everyone who parked there, neighbors, visitors, even delivery vans. I noted the tags, the times, the patterns. I photographed the lot from my bedroom window, zooming in to capture the HOA's freshly painted reserved for board members signs. I wasn't sure what I'd do with all this yet, but knowledge was leverage, and I was building a mountain of it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the pines, I walked the perimeter of the lot, my boots crunching on the edge where the asphalt met my grass. The air was cool, carrying the scent of sap and earth. I could still see the faint outline of where my grandfather's gravel had been, before the HOA steamrolled it into their vision of community progress. I crouched down, running my fingers over the boundary line. This was mine, not theirs. Mine. That night, I sat at my laptop, the glow illuminating my face as I drafted an email to a lawyer friend from the city. I attached scans of the deed, the county records, and a few choice photos of the parking lot. "Can you look into this?" I wrote. "I think I've got something." I hit send, leaned back in my chair, and stared out the window at the dark silhouette of the lot. The HOA thought they could rewrite the rules of Pine Hollow, but they'd underestimated me. I wasn't just a new resident they could bully. I was the one with the deed, the proof, and now, the plan. The courthouse smelled like paper and dust and the faint copper tang of old coins. Morning light pushed through the high windows, striping the marble floor in pale bands. I stood in the public records office with the map flat beneath my hands and felt the world pivot beneath me. The map was a careful thing. Parcels in neat squares, road names printed in a serif font that made every curve feel official. My name wasn't in the HOA minutes or their glossy newsletters, but it was there, in black ink and legalese that felt heavier than any brick. The deed, the chain of title, and the tiny legal description that wrapped my property like a noose. The road wasn't just a path worn by tires and tempers. The road that everyone in the neighborhood used to get to the supermarket, the playground, the bakery, was mine. The shoulders, the drainage easement, the plot labeled community lot, where they parked their trucks and SUVs like a permanent armada, mine. Not ambiguous. Not a mistake. Mine, with a meets and bounds precision that made every boasting HOA notice a lie. I read and reread the pages until the letters blurred. The clerk, a woman with a braid like a rope, refolded the map and slid it back to me with a practiced hand. "We keep those for a long time," she said. She didn't ask why I wanted them. She never did. People who come to the records office usually have patience or poison in their eyes. The latter was easier to deal with. Outside the courthouse, The sun had warmed the sidewalks, and the town hustled on as it always did. Baristas juggling orders, a couple arguing gently about paint colors, a kid on a skateboard who had no idea he was living inside someone else's fight. I carried the map back to my truck like contraband and sat on the hood to think. The thing about proof is that it's both liberating and destabilizing. Proof lets you breathe. Proof also leaves you with terrible choices. I thought about suing. I thought about lawyer fees, depositions, the slow and grinding machine of civil court that chews up small lives and spits out settlements and exhaustion. I pictured Karen's face in front of a judge, her practiced indignation, her campaign of neighborhood petitions. I pictured the HOA's glossy letterhead and their army of polite threats. The more I imagined it, the more absurd it felt. Court meant waiting. Years. While the HOA would meanwhile continue to park, host weekend barbecues on my shoulders, and put up signs as if they were decorating a rented pavilion. No, I wanted immediacy. I wanted a single, clean event that would change the neighborhood's rhythm the way a fallen tree changes a path. When the thought landed, clear and cold, it felt less like revenge and more like arithmetic. They had turned a thing that belonged to me into their convenience. I would turn that convenience into absence. But I am not a violent man. My hands shake when I'm angry, and I don't have the appetite for property damage that leaves lives ruined in its wake. There are softer ways to make people feel their loss. There are ways that require coordination and nerve and legal teeth, but deliver the same result. The cars would be gone. They would wake up to empty parking rows and a silence so loud it would sound like consequence. First, there was the work of cataloging. I drove the boundary one more time, windows down, the air smelling of asphalt and distant pine. I took notes. I watched where the HOA had laid gravel and asphalt over the lines that, until recently, had been green shoulders. I photographed the signs they'd put up, reserved, residents only, and the little white stones that marked property lines in the way that canine scent marks territory. Each image was a small indictment. Each file a tiny, accumulating proof. Then I started talking, quietly and selectively. There is a kind of people who hate the idea of confrontation but relish the certainty of being on the winning side. I remembered Tom, who ran the hardware store on the corner and had once helped my grandfather build a fence without questioning a single blueprint. Tom listened to me over 2 coffees, ears folding into his stories about the town, and then said, "You need more than a map, friend. You need leverage." He didn't ask whether my plan was legal. He asked whether I understood what leverage meant. Leverage, I learned, came in many forms. There was the small, bureaucratic kind that came from filling out forms correctly and finding the county clerk who still liked to follow the letter of a law instead of chasing popular opinion. There was the social kind, quietly reminding the people who rented the clubhouse that their HOA board answered to statutes and to permits. There was the kind that came from relationships. A tow operator who disliked Karen for reasons that had nothing to do with me. A retired county inspector who preferred the company of paper maps to board meetings. I did not tell anyone the whole plan. That was important. Secrets kept the engine running. But I trusted pieces of it to 3 people who owned small monopolies in town. Tom, the hardware store owner, Elena, the tow yard manager, a woman with a laugh like a slammed fist and a sense of timing that bordered on clairvoyance, and Marcus, the retired inspector, whose cane clicked like punctuation. Each had reasons to help that had nothing to do with heroism. Tom owed the family favors that came from decades of neighborliness. Elena hated entitled drivers who took up space like declarations. Marcus wanted to be useful again. We began with notices, formal, innocuous, bureaucratic things that smelled of envelopes and stamps. I drafted letters. The language was precise but neutral, the kind of prose that sounds like an invitation until you parse it closely. Parking on private land without permission is subject to removal, one said. Vehicles parked in an unpermitted community lot may be subject to impoundment, another read. The HOA was shocked. Outrage folded into an email chain with capitalized words and thinly veiled threats. They sent a lawyer's letter back, but the pages only confirmed what I already knew. The map, the deeds, the chain of title. On a humid Friday evening, the neighborhood hummed as it always did. The collapse of lawn chairs, children shouting like wind chimes, the clink of adult laughter at someone else's grill. I walked the lot with Marcus at my side. He tapped his cane at the paint that had been laid over the boundary stone and said, "They always think paint is proof." The first car to be taken was one of Karen's, a glossy SUV that she parked like a declaration in front of the clubhouse every weekend. Karen had been the loudest at meetings, first to volunteer, first to criticize, first to use association money to put up a sign or two. That night the vehicle was there, keys inside, lights dimmed. The streets had thinned to the kind of silence that had nothing to do with night and everything to do with waiting. I watched from the shadows as Elena's truck rolled in like a promise. There was no smashing of glass, no dramatic ripping of locks. There was a quiet choreography. The operator checked paperwork, matched Vince, and called in a number that sounded official. He did not need my nod. He did not need my interference. The car left calmly, as if being escorted to a spa rather than exiled. 2 more cars followed over the next days. Neighbors' pickups and an old sedan that had been sleeping in the lot for months. The message was precise without being loud. Space could be taken back. By the time Karen realized what was happening, the parking lot was half empty, a patchwork of asphalt shadows and curving white lines. She stormed to my gate on Sunday morning, heels clicking like an accusation, and demanded explanations. I watched her braid unravel in the wind as she gestured with the kind of performative rage she used at meetings. "You took them," she shouted. "You thieved our property." I could have told her the entire legal history in one breath. The survey from 1912, the easement that never existed, the county's quiet approval of my grandfather's deed. I could have handed her the map with an archival stamp and watched her color drain from her face. Instead, I smiled and said, "I didn't take them. I simply informed the county that vehicles were parked on private property." She did not understand the economy of small towns where a properly worded complaint and a warden's memory could do the work of thunder. She did not know how to argue with men who kept files in drawers and names in a ledger. She did not understand the way bureaucracy can look like indifference until it's wielded precisely. Her threat slid off like rain off old shingles. The neighborhood watched. Some called for my head on a platter. Others, embarrassingly, called to ask if I could do something about the truck of a neighbor who'd double-parked for months. The board sent a formal letter. The county sent notices. My mailbox filled with invitations to mediation and requests for joint surveys. Mediation sounded like the court's tame cousin, one that wanted to shake hands and leave with a punch in the ribs. I accepted a room at the community center with a table long enough to look like compromise and closed myself into a fight I had not chosen but had the means to win. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and the faint citrus of cleaning solution. Karen came armed with petitions and photographs, and 2 lawyers who wrote faster than they spoke. She presented a theatrical chronology, how the HOA had improved the land for everyone, how the parking lot was a community resource, how the homeowners had contributed time and money. She wanted guilt and precedent and the warm glow of a judge's favor. I countered with documents and silence. I offered the deed and the printed surveys and the county's own ledger entries. The lawyers poked and prodded like men checking for weakness. Marcus, who sat in the corner with his cane across his knees, hummed an old hymn to himself and looked like the world's least interested jury. The mediator, an obliging woman who smiled like a bank statement, threw possibilities across the table: easements, paid licenses, community use agreements. She did not have the force of law. She had only civility and coffee and a desire to keep everyone from wasting more of the county's time. After hours, when arguments thinned and the room contracted to the breath of a few people, Karen's lawyer leaned across and asked me quietly, "Why would you do this?" I thought of my grandfather, of the way he'd walk that land every morning, hat folded against his chest, talking to the trees like they were old friends with long memories. I thought of the years his maps had sat in a bookstore archive with a price tag and a smudge of somebody else's thumb. I thought of the afternoon Karen's HOA had put up a sign on the shoulders in a ribbon of official-looking vinyl and smiled like someone at a coronation. Because I could, I wanted to say. Because the truth was there, and because watching them rearrange public life on my property made me feel smaller every time I drove past the clubhouse. Because there are things in a life that you defend not for money but for the principle of ownership and the memory of hands that tilled the soil before you were born. Instead, I said, because I paid for what I own. The plan was coming together, piece by careful piece, like a puzzle I'd been assembling in the quiet hours of the night. My notebook, now dog-eared and brimming with details, was my war chest. License plates, parking patterns, HOA board members' schedules. It was all there, a meticulous record of Pine Hollow's daily rhythm. But knowledge alone wasn't enough. I needed action, something that would hit the HOA where it hurt, something that would make Karen and her cronies feel the weight of their own arrogance. That's when I started making calls. It took a few tries to find the right players. The first tow company I contacted, a small outfit called Bob's Holloway, sounded skeptical when I explained the situation. "You sure you own that land?" Bob drawled over the phone, his voice thick with cigarette smoke. "HOAs can be a real pain, but I don't want to get sued." I emailed him scans of the deed and the county records, highlighting the boundary lines that clearly showed the parking lot sat on my property. I followed up with a photo of the lot, timestamped, showing Karen's SUV parked in its usual spot. "This is my land," I said when I called him back. "Every car there is trespassing. I just need someone to enforce it." Bob hesitated, then quoted me a price for a retainer, cash up front to keep his trucks on standby. "All right," he said finally. "But you better be sure about this. Folks don't take kindly to getting their cars towed." "I'm sure," I replied, my voice steady. "Send me the contract." The second company, Pine Valley Towing, was even easier to convince. The owner, a gruff woman named Marla, didn't care about the details. "You got the deed? You got the cash? Then we're good," she said, her tone all business. I liked her immediately. She sent over a one-page agreement, no nonsense, and I wired her the retainer that same afternoon. "Every vehicle on this road," I told both companies during our final calls, "treat it as trespassing. No exceptions. I'll send you the list of plates and times to start with, but if it's parked on my land, it's fair game." They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. The paperwork was ironclad, and the money was in their accounts. I'd made sure of that. My lawyer friend, Sarah, had reviewed everything before I signed. "This is bold," she'd said, her voice crackling over the phone. "You're within your rights, but you're poking a hornet's nest. You ready for the fallout?" "I've been ready since Karen waved away my deed," I said, and I could almost hear Sarah's grin through the line. The first tow was scheduled for the following Monday, 6 a.m. sharp, when the HOA board's cars would be lined up like sitting ducks. I'd chosen the time deliberately, early enough that most of Pine Hollow would still be asleep, but late enough that Karen, Greg, and Linda would already be parked, their vehicles ripe for the taking. I'd given Bob and Marla a prioritized list, Karen's SUV first, then Greg's Lexus, then Linda's Audi. If there was time, they could grab the rest of the cars in the lot, but the board members were the main event. The night before, I barely slept. I sat at my kitchen table, the deed spread out in front of me like a battle map. My laptop glowed with the email confirmations from both tow companies, their contracts attached. Outside, the parking lot was quiet, the HOA's reserved for board members' signs glinting under the streetlights. I sipped my coffee, cold now, and imagined Karen's face when she realized her precious SUV was gone. I imagined Greg's bluster, Linda's nervous stammering. I imagined the HOA's smug control slipping through their fingers like sand. At 5:45 a.m., I stationed myself on the porch, a thermos in hand, my notebook tucked into my jacket. The sky was still dark, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. Right on cue, the low rumble of tow trucks echoed down the road. Two of them, Bob's beat-up rig with its faded logo and Marla's sleek black beast, rolled into view. They didn't hesitate. Bob's driver hooked Karen's SUV first, the winch whining as it lifted the front wheels off the ground. Marla's crew went for Greg's Lexus, their movements quick and practiced. By 6:15, both vehicles were gone, vanishing into the dawn with barely a sound. Linda's Audi was next, followed by a couple of neighbors' cars that had been parked overnight. I watched it all unfold, my heart pounding but my face calm. No one came out to argue. No one even stirred. The neighborhood slept on, oblivious to the quiet revolution happening in their precious parking lot. By 7 a.m., the lot was empty, the asphalt bare except for a single no parking sign I'd planted in the center the night before. It wasn't an official sign, just something I'd cobbled together with wood and paint from the garage, but it sent the message. This was my land, and I was taking it back. I didn't have to wait long for the fallout. By 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Karen, her voice shrill enough to crack glass. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she demanded. Those cars were legally parked. You can't just tow people's property. You'll hear from our lawyer. I didn't call her back. I didn't need to. Sarah had already prepared me for this. The deed was clear, the law was on my side, and the tow companies had followed protocol to the letter. Karen could scream all she wanted, but she'd built her castle on my land, and I was done playing nice. That afternoon, I drove to the county clerk's office and filed a formal complaint against the HOA for unauthorized use of private property. I attached copies of the deed, the tow contracts, and photos of the lot before and after the paving. Sarah had helped me draft it, her legal jargon sharp enough to cut through any HOA nonsense. This'll tie them up for months, she'd said. Maybe longer if they try to fight it. Back home, I sat on my porch again, watching the empty lot. A few neighbors had started to notice, their cars circling aimlessly before parking along the street. Whispers would spread soon, I knew. Questions, complaints, maybe even support. I didn't care. This wasn't about winning friends. This was about drawing a line. The HOA had thought they could steamroll me, just like they'd steamrolled my grandfather's gravel into their perfect little parking lot. But they'd underestimated me. I wasn't just a new resident with a grudge. I was the one with the deed, the contracts, and the will to fight. And I was just getting started. The night was heavy, the kind of stillness that settles over Pine Hollow when the world holds its breath. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just the faint hum of anticipation in my bones. I sat on my porch, cloaked in darkness, a thermos of black coffee in my hands. The clock on my phone read 11:55 p.m. 5 minutes until showtime. I'd been planning this for days, ever since the first tow had rattled the HOA's cage. Monday's operation had been a warning shot. Tonight was the real strike. The parking lot, my parking lot, stretched out before me, its asphalt gleaming under the sodium glow of the streetlights. Karen's SUV was back, parked defiantly in her usual spot, as if daring me to try again. Greg's Lexus sat beside it, polished to a mirror sheen. Linda's Audi was there too, along with a handful of other cars, a Mercedes with a vanity plate reading Boss 4LYF, a BMW convertible, a couple of generic SUVs belonging to neighbors who'd fallen in line with the HOA's rules. They all thought they were safe, that Monday had been a fluke, a one-off stunt by the new guy with a chip on his shoulder. They were wrong. I doubled down with the tow companies. Bob's Holloway and Pine Valley Towing were on speed dial now, their retainers topped up with another round of cash transfers. My lawyer, Sarah, had double-checked the paperwork, ensuring every move was airtight. You're playing with fire, she'd warned over the phone, her voice half amused, half concerned. But legally, you're bulletproof. Just don't expect an invite to the HOA Christmas party. I'll survive, I told her, and I meant it. This wasn't about making friends. It was about reclaiming what was mine. At midnight, the first diesel engine rumbled in the distance, a low growl that cut through the silence like a blade. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on the road. Bob's beat-up tow truck rolled into view first, its headlights slicing through the dark. Marla's black rig followed, sleek and silent, like a predator stalking prey. They pulled up to the lot, their drivers moving with the quiet efficiency of men and women who'd done this 100 times. Chains clinked softly as they hooked the first car, Karen's SUV, naturally. The winch whined, lifting the front wheels off the ground with a satisfying lurch. I allowed myself a small smile. One by one, the trucks worked their way through the lot. Greg's Lexus went next, its polished chrome glinting as it was dragged away. Linda's Audi followed, then the Mercedes, the BMW, the SUVs. The drivers didn't hesitate, didn't pause to question the job. I'd given them clear instructions. Every vehicle on my land was trespassing, no exceptions. The list of license plates I'd sent them was just a formality. Tonight, I wanted the lot cleared, top to bottom. Chains rattled, tires squealed faintly against the asphalt, and one by one, the cars vanished into the night, towed off to the impound lot on the edge of town. I stayed on the porch, watching the whole operation unfold. My notebook lay open on my lap, but I didn't need to write anything down tonight. This wasn't about gathering more evidence. This was about sending a message. The HOA had ignored my deed, paved over my grandfather's gravel, and tried to bully me into submission with their passes and rules. Now they'd learn what it felt like to lose something. By 1:30 a.m., the lot was empty. The tow trucks rolled out as quietly as they'd come, their taillights fading into the dark. All that remained were oil stains on the asphalt, dark splotches marking where the HOA's pride and joy had sat just hours before. I stood up, stretching my legs, and walked to the edge of the lot. The no parking sign I'd planted after Monday's tow still stood in the center, its paint a little chipped, but its message clear. I ran my fingers over the wood, feeling the rough grain under my skin. This was my land, my fight. I knew the storm was coming. Karen would wake up to an empty parking lot and lose her mind. Greg would probably call the sheriff, blustering about theft and vandalism. Linda would fidget and stammer, torn between panic and trying to keep the peace. The neighbors would talk, their whispers turning into shouts as they realized their cars were gone too. I was ready for it. Sarah had already drafted a response to any legal threats, citing the deed, the county records, and the tow contracts. The HOA could scream all they wanted, but they'd built their empire on stolen ground, and I was tearing it down. I went back inside, the house quiet except for the faint creak of the floorboards under my boots. I poured the last of the coffee into my mug and sat at the kitchen table, the deed spread out before me like a trophy. My phone buzzed, a text from Marla. All done. 8 vehicles total. Impound lots full tonight. I typed a quick thanks and set the phone down. Outside, the night was still again, the silence deeper now, as if the world knew something had shifted. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the oil stains through the window. They were all that remained of the HOA's arrogance, and even those would fade with time. But me? I wasn't going anywhere. This was my land, my home, and I'd fight for it until the last car was gone. The sun had barely risen over Pine Hollow when the chaos erupted. I woke to the sound of Karen's voice, shrill and piercing, cutting through the morning stillness like a siren. From my bedroom window, I saw her standing in the middle of the empty parking lot, her silk robe flapping in the breeze, her phone pressed to her ear as she screamed into it. "This is outrageous. I want answers now," she shouted, her free hand waving wildly, as if she could summon her SUV back by sheer force of will. The lot was barren, the asphalt marked only by the oil stains and my makeshift no parking sign, standing like a sentinel in the center. I pulled on a hoodie and stepped onto the porch, coffee mug in hand, settling into my usual spot to watch the show. The neighborhood was coming alive, not with the usual hum of morning routines, but with a frantic, disoriented energy. Neighbors spilled out of their houses, some still in pajamas, others clutching car keys as they stared at their empty driveways and the vacant lot. Greg, the HOA treasurer, stormed out of his house, his face red as he jabbed at his phone, probably calling the sheriff or his lawyer or both. Linda, the secretary, hovered near her front door, wringing her hands, her eyes darting nervously between the lot and the growing crowd. "Who did this?" A man in a bathrobe bellowed, waving his arms at the empty space where his Mercedes had been. "This is theft. Grand Theft Auto." His wife, clutching a mug of tea, nodded furiously, her voice rising in a wail. "We paid good money for that car. Someone's going to pay for this." Across the street, a younger couple stood in their driveway, staring at the spot where their BMW convertible had sat the night before. The woman was on her phone, her voice low but panicked, while her husband paced, muttering about vandalism. "Probably kids," he said to no one in particular. "Stupid teenagers pulling a prank." His wife shook her head, her eyes wide. "This isn't a prank, Tom. Every car is gone." Theories flew like wildfire. Theft, vandalism, a coordinated heist, a gang of joyriders. No one mentioned the tow trucks, the deed, or the fact that the parking lot sat on my land. No one suspected the truth. I had erased their cars, legally, methodically, with the precision of a surgeon. Bob's Holloway and Pine Valley Towing had done their jobs flawlessly, carting off 8 vehicles under the cover of darkness. My lawyer, Sarah, had ensured every step was above board, every contract airtight. The HOA could rage all they wanted, but they had no ground to stand on, literally. Karen was the epicenter of the storm. She'd moved from the lot to the sidewalk, her robe now half untied, her hair escaping its perfect bob as she shouted into her phone. "I don't care what it takes. Find out where my car is," she snapped, then spun around to face the growing crowd. "This is an attack on our community. Someone's targeting Pine Hollow, and I promise you, We will get to the bottom of it. Her eyes swept the street, landing briefly on my porch. I raised my mug in a mock salute, my expression neutral. She glared, her lips tightening, but she didn't approach. Not yet. Greg was next to lose it. He marched up to the lot, his phone still in hand, and kicked at my no parking sign. It wobbled but held firm. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, turning to the neighbors. "Who put this here? Who's behind this?" No one answered, but eyes started to shift, suspicion creeping into their faces. A woman in yoga pants clutched her toddler's hand and whispered to her husband, "You think it's the new guy?" He was mad about the gate. I kept my face blank, sipping my coffee. Let them whisper. Let them guess. The truth was in the deed, the county records, the tow contracts locked in my desk drawer. I'd spent weeks building my case, documenting every car, every tag, every smug HOA. Meeting where they dismissed my rights. They thought they could pave over my grandfather's land, gate off my road, and bully me into submission. They were wrong. By mid-morning, the sheriff's deputy arrived, a tired-looking man with a clipboard and a badge that read Deputy Harris. Karen pounced on him like a hawk, gesturing wildly at the empty lot. "This is a crime scene," she declared. 8 cars gone. You need to dust for prints, check for surveillance footage, something. Harris scribbled notes, his expression bored, and asked a few questions about the lot's ownership. Karen faltered, her confidence cracking. "It's HOA property," she said, but her voice lacked its usual certainty. I stayed on my porch, out of the fray, watching as the deputy walked the lot's perimeter. He stopped near my sign, squinting at it, then glanced at my house. I gave him a nod, nothing more. He didn't approach, just jotted something down and moved on. I knew what he'd find if he dug into it. My deed, clear as day, showing the lot as mine. The HOA's records, on the other hand, were a mess of assumptions and overreach, with no legal claim to back them up. The neighbors' panic grew as the morning wore on. Some called tow yards, others insurance companies. A few piled into Ubers to check the impound lot themselves, only to return with grim faces. "They want $500 per car to release them," the Mercedes guy shouted, his voice carrying across the street. "This is extortion." I bit back a smile. The tow companies were just following my instructions, and I'd made sure their fees were steep enough to sting. By noon, Karen had rallied a small group of neighbors into an impromptu meeting on her front lawn. I could hear snatches of their conversation, words like lawsuit, retaliation, new guy. They still didn't know the full story, but they were starting to piece it together. Linda, ever the peacemaker, suggested they talk to him before escalating things. Greg shot that down, his voice booming. "He's a troublemaker. We need to hit back hard." I finished my coffee and went inside, closing the door behind me. Let them plot. Let them rage. I had the law on my side, the deed in my hand, and a plan that was far from finished. The HOA had woken to chaos, but I was just warming up. They'd tried to erase my rights. Now I'd erase their cars. And I wasn't done yet. The air in Pine Hollow was thick with tension as dusk settled over the neighborhood. The chaos of the morning had simmered into a restless unease, and by late afternoon, the HOA's emergency meeting notice was plastered on every mailbox and posted in the community group chat. Urgent, 7 p.m., clubhouse. All residents encouraged to attend. I knew what it was about. They knew I knew. The stage was set, and I was ready. I walked to the clubhouse, my boots crunching on the gravel path that wound through the pines. In my hand, I carried a manila folder containing the deed, the county records, and copies of the tow contracts. My arsenal, meticulously prepared. My lawyer, Sarah, had coached me over the phone that afternoon. "Keep it simple," she'd said. "Show the deed, state the facts. Don't let them drag you into a shouting match. You've got the law on your side." I wasn't looking for a fight, but I wasn't backing down either. The HOA had crossed a line, and tonight, I'd draw one of my own. The clubhouse was a squat, cedar-sided building at the heart of Pine Hollow, its windows glowing with fluorescent light. A crowd had already gathered when I arrived, neighbors packed into folding chairs, their faces a mix of anger, confusion, and exhaustion. Karen stood at the front, her navy blazer replaced with a crisp white blouse, her blonde bob restored to its usual perfection. She clutched a gavel, tapping it impatiently against a podium. Greg, the treasurer, sat to her left, his arms crossed, his face still flushed from the morning's outrage. Linda, the secretary, fidgeted with a stack of papers, her eyes darting nervously around the room. The rest of the HOA board flanked them, a row of stern faces ready to rally their troops. I took a seat in the back, the folder resting on my lap. Whispers rippled through the crowd as neighbors noticed me, some curious, others openly hostile. The man with the Boss 4LYF Mercedes plate glared from across the room, his wife muttering something under her breath. The young couple with the BMW convertible sat a few rows ahead, their heads bent together, casting furtive glances my way. I kept my expression neutral, my hands steady. Let them stare. Let them guess. I'd waited weeks for this moment, and I wasn't here to play nice. Karen banged the gavel, silencing the room. This meeting of the Pine Hollow Homeowners Association is called to order, she announced, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. We're here to address the outrageous events of last night, when 8 vehicles, our vehicles, were illegally towed from our community parking lot. A murmur of agreement rose from the crowd, punctuated by a few shouts of unacceptable. And who's responsible? Karen raised a hand, her eyes sweeping the room before landing on me. We have reason to believe this was a deliberate act of sabotage, she said, her tone dripping with accusation. And we will not stand for it. Greg stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is a crime, he bellowed. Someone targeted our community, stole our property, and now they're extorting us with impound fees. I say we call the sheriff, file charges, and sue whoever's behind this into oblivion. The crowd erupted in cheers, fists pounding on chairs. Linda shrank in her seat, scribbling furiously in her notebook as if documenting the chaos would make it go away. Karen banged the gavel again. We'll get to action steps, she said. But first, we need to hear from everyone. If anyone has information about this incident, now's the time to speak. Her eyes locked on me again, daring me to stand. I rose slowly, the folder in my hand, and made my way to the front. The room fell quiet, every pair of eyes following me. Karen's lips tightened, but she stepped aside, gesturing to the podium with a mocking flourish. The floor is yours, she said, her voice laced with venom. I set the folder down, opened it, and held up the deed, its faded ink stark against the white paper. This is the deed to my property at 23 Maple Drive, I said, my voice calm but firm, carrying to the back of the room. It includes the land where your so-called community parking lot sits. You paved over my grandfather's gravel without my permission. You parked on my land without my consent. Every car in that lot was trespassing. A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a low hum of disbelief. Karen's face flushed, but she didn't interrupt. Greg opened his mouth, then closed it, his eyes narrowing. I pressed on, pulling out the county records and holding them up. These records confirm my ownership. The HOA has no legal claim to that land. I warned you weeks ago, but you ignored me. So I acted. I hired tow companies, legally, to remove every trespassing vehicle. Pay the impound fees, or lose your cars. The room went dead silent. For a moment, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the clubhouse. Every breath held, every eye locked on me. Then chaos erupted. Greg leapt to his feet, shouting, "This is absurd. You can't just tow our cars." The Mercedes guy yelled, "You're a liar. That's our lot." His wife chimed in, "We'll sue you for this." Others joined the fray, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of outrage and denial. Karen banged her gavel repeatedly, struggling to regain control. "Order! Order!" she shouted, her composure cracking. When the room finally quieted, she turned to me, her eyes blazing. "You have no proof," she said. "You're a new resident stirring up trouble. That lot has been HOA property for years." I slid the county records across the podium toward her. "Check for yourself," I said. "Or better yet, ask the county clerk. Ask the sheriff. Ask your own lawyer. You built your lot on my land, and I'm done letting you walk all over me." Linda, her voice trembling, spoke up for the first time. Maybe we should look into this. If he's right, we could be in trouble." Greg shot her a withering look, but a few neighbors nodded, their anger giving way to uncertainty. Karen wasn't ready to back down. "This is a stunt," she said, pointing at me. "You're trying to extort us, just like you extorted those tow fees. We'll fight this, and you'll regret it." I met her gaze, unflinching. "Do what you have to do," I said. "But the law's on my side. You can pay the fees and get your cars back, or you can keep fighting and lose more than that. I gathered my papers, tucked the folder under my arm, and walked back to my seat, the room buzzing around me. The meeting spiraled from there, neighbors shouting over each other, some demanding legal action, others urging caution. Karen tried to steer the discussion toward a vote for a lawsuit, but the crowd was too fractured, too shaken by the deed in my hand. I didn't stay for the end. I'd said my piece, laid my cards on the table. As I stepped out into the cool night air, the pines whispering overhead, I felt the weight of the day lift. The HOA was panicking, but I was calm. They'd underestimated me from the start, and now they were scrambling to catch up. Let them try. I had the deed, the law, and a plan that was far from finished. By Monday morning, Pine Hollow was a different place. The chaos of the weekend had burned itself out, leaving a stunned, begrudging acceptance in its wake. The HOA's iron grip on the neighborhood had cracked, and the pieces were falling apart faster than Karen could scream into her phone. I woke early, the dawn light filtering through my curtains, and stepped onto my porch with a fresh mug of coffee. The parking lot, my parking lot, stood empty, the asphalt scarred with oil stains but free of the HOA's gleaming SUVs and vanity-plated status symbols. My no parking sign still stood proudly in the center, a little weathered but unbowed, a quiet testament to my victory. The fallout from Friday's midnight tow operation and the Saturday emergency meeting had been swift and brutal. By Sunday, the whispers of legal threats had fizzled out as the HOA's lawyer, a harried man in a cheap suit, confirmed what I already knew. The deed was ironclad, the county records unambiguous. The parking lot was mine, built illegally on my grandfather's land, and every car parked there had been trespassing. The tow companies, backed by my contracts and Sarah's legal oversight, were untouchable. The HOA had no case, and they knew it. Checks started arriving at the impound lot by Monday noon. Thousands of dollars in fees poured in, $500 per car, plus additional charges for storage and processing. Karen's SUV, Greg's Lexus, Linda's Audi, the Boss 4LYF Mercedes, the BMW convertible, all of them racking up bills that stung worse than the HOA's pride. I didn't need to be there to imagine the scene. Neighbors grimacing as they handed over their credit cards, muttering curses under their breath, their wallets lighter and their egos bruised. A few tried to argue with the tow companies, but Bob and Marla held firm, their paperwork as solid as my deed. Pay up or lose your car for good. The HOA didn't stop at the impound fees. The county got involved, slapping them with fines for unauthorized construction on private property. The paving of my grandfather's gravel, the installation of their precious gate, the reserved for board members' signs. All of it had been done without permits, without my consent, without a shred of legal standing. The fines piled up, hundreds turning into thousands as the county dug deeper into the HOA's shoddy records. Sarah had tipped me off to file the complaint strategically, and it paid off. The HOA's budget, bloated with their self-important community projects, was now hemorrhaging cash. By Monday afternoon, the physical signs of their defeat began to appear. A crew arrived with sledgehammers and crowbars, tearing down the HOA's gold-flecked gate that had blocked my road for weeks. The wrought iron groaned as it was pried from its hinges, the pine tree logo splintering under the blows. Neighbors watched from their lawns, some with folded arms, others with phones raised, recording the end of an era. Karen was nowhere to be seen, but I could imagine her fuming in her perfectly decorated living room, her clipboard useless now. Next came the signs. The reserved for board members placards, the community parking only notices, the glossy welcome to Pine Hollow HOA banners. They were all ripped down, tossed into a pile by the roadside like so much trash. A bulldozer rolled in by evening, tearing up the edges of the asphalt where it encroached furthest onto my land. The lot wouldn't be fully restored to my grandfather's gravel yet. That would come later, when I had the time and funds to do it right. But for now, it was enough to see the HOA's vision of progress reduced to rubble. I drove past the lot that evening, my old pickup rumbling over the road that was mine again. The gate was gone, the signs were gone, and the air felt lighter, as if Pine Hollow had exhaled a breath it had been holding for years. I parked in my driveway, the same one my grandfather had carved out decades ago, and stepped out to survey the scene. The lot was empty, save for my no parking sign, now joined by a new one I'd ordered from a local print shop. Private property, no trespassing. It wasn't fancy, just black text on white metal, but it said everything that needed saying. The neighbors avoided my gaze as I walked the property line later that day, my boots kicking up dust where the asphalt had been peeled back. Some still whispered, no doubt blaming me for their empty bank accounts and impounded cars, but others nodded, a grudging respect in their eyes. The young couple with the BMW stopped by my porch, the husband shuffling his feet. Didn't realize the lot was yours, he said. HOA never told us. Sorry about you know. I nodded, keeping my words short. It's done now. Just don't park there again. Karen surfaced later that week, her blazer replaced by a subdued sweater, her voice quieter at the next HOA meeting. I didn't attend, but I heard through the grapevine that she'd proposed a restructuring of the HOA's policies, starting with a review of all property boundaries. Greg had resigned as treasurer, citing personal reasons, and Linda was reportedly taking a leave of absence. The HOA's reign of unchecked power was crumbling, and I'd lit the fuse. Every time I drive past the lot now, I smile. The road is mine again, open and free, the way my grandfather intended. The pines sway overhead, the gravel crunches under my tires, and the ghosts of those towed cars, Karen's SUV, Greg's Lexus, the whole glittering parade of HOA arrogance, linger only in the oil stains fading into the asphalt. They thought they could steal from me, pave over my rights, and bully me into submission. Instead, I vanished every one of their cars and reminded them whose land they were standing on. This was my home, my road, my rules, and I wasn't done fighting for it.